Get underway. I te karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai. E hi ake ana te ātākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. All right, so welcome back to our Strategy and Policy Committee meeting of the 29th of October. Obviously, this is not the 29th of October today, but we are continuing over from our last hearings session. So as always, let myself or Democracy Advisor know if you're going to leave the meeting. Afternoon tea will be at 3:30, and we don't do apologies or anything now because we've already gone through that for this meeting when we had our beginning of the submissions on the 29th of October. So that means we can get straight underway. So I'd like to welcome Susanna and Lester from the Royal New Zealand Ballet to come and speak to us. Kia ora, nau mai, haere mai. So you're both very familiar with this. And I imagine there could be some questions, so if you want to allow a bit of time in that 10 minutes for a few questions, that'd be great. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for the opportunity of talking to you about this important issue and for the opportunity to make a submission. We greatly appreciate it. I'm not going to run through the submission or take it as read, but there are a couple of points that I would like to highlight for us. Money earned from Class 4 gaming machines is approximately 6% of our income, so it's about $550,000 a year, so it's not insignificant. And it pays for things that otherwise wouldn't be funded. The Lion Foundation particularly has been a long-time supporter of our education program, not only nationally, but also on a region-by-region basis. Pub Charity has been a long-time supporter of ours as well, paying for core performance and infrastructure, as well as activities, and then there's a whole range of others that make up the mix. So just to give you an example, this morning we did our school matinee of Sleeping Beauty. It's still on, and this is 1,100 students attended this performance. The low decile buses, the buses for the low decile schools to attend were all supported by Four Winds Foundation. The education program that sat alongside that is paid for by the Lion Foundation. Pub Charity are paying for contributing to salaries, infrastructure costs, venue hire and touring costs. They're very much embedded in the programs that we deliver in this area. And this is not just an isolated example. This is the support that goes right throughout the year. Just recently, a few weeks ago, again with the support of Class 4 gaming machines, we did the whānau day at Te Papa. It was their biggest day, which is a free event for the community. It is their biggest event that they've had since lockdown in March. Bringing people back to that venue. So it's an important program for us. Class 4 gaming also supports the likes of works that we do in prisons. It's very comprehensive and covers the full range. So I guess really the point of our submission is that if you want to see a change to this, then for us it's around where are these activities paid for, because nobody else pays for them. We highlight in our submission the pressures that we have with commercial sponsors, where we've got to with donors, and the pressures that are on community trusts. So the issue for us is who pays for it, because if we can't pay for it, then those activities get cut. And I guess really that's the heart of our submission today. So I'd be happy to take any questions that you have about that.
Kia ora, thank you, Lester. Our first partai question is from Councillor Young.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for the Sleeping Beauty, which was absolutely magnificent, although I don't like the colour melon. Just so if you're costuming in future, just think of my colour scheme. But it was fantastic. So just wondering, if you lost this money, what would you have to cut?
I think the key one for us is that this covers our education program and community program, and that is where, particularly with the support of the last one, the major one, so Lion Foundation and Pub Charity, particularly, that is where it would cut. In terms of numbers, that is about 50% of the numbers across the country that we engage with. Wellington benefits from us being here. In fact, they get a third of all of our education programs take place in Wellington because of proximity. So for us, it's probably around 12,000 young people would miss out on an annual basis. In terms of the touring support for other activity, we would probably need to look at, if we're looking across the board, we would looking at reducing one of our touring programs from 4 to 3 across a year. So it's quite significant.
Thank you.
Kia ora, got a pātai from Councillor Paul.
Thank you for your presentation. You answered my first question about those activities being cut. Did you have off the top, like roughly how much money per year goes into your community and education programs? And second, will you be lobbying central government for more funding for those activities if you lose this revenue because we get such a small slice of the pie and they have so much more revenue than we have?
Yeah, that's a good question. The money that roughly 100% of the money that comes from this goes into those programs. So if we retain the support from the community trusts or the ones that we might do from donations, we would be looking at cutting probably $550,000 worth of activity. And we'd need to work out what that means. So that would result in staff cuts for our dance educators and some of the infrastructure as well as very specific activities. There's some that I would be loath to lose. For instance, activities with a strong focus on participation, like our the accessibility and disability area is important to us, and the prisons programs, which is we're making quite a difference over a sustained period of time. I mean, they're intensive programs, but I would struggle to find a way to see if we can make those happen. As far as lobbying central government, they're in a tough position as well. I mean, they have said to us, in terms of the 2021-22 budget, don't come and ask for any more money unless you can demonstrate critical failure. So is this considered critical failure? Who knows? And also, what you're talking about is over time. So it's a whittling away over time. And so, but it does get to that point, I think, where there's only so much you can extract out of the situation.
Kia ora, Councillor Rush.
Thanks, Lester. So your question, you mentioned where will the money come from? And my immediate thought is the people who either participate in ballet or attend ballet, events and so forth. So I'm looking at your breakdown of your income, and it's difficult to see it's in black and white, but I mean, do people pay subs at a ballet school or?
Yes, they do, but the programs that we're talking about aren't for people that are paying to attend dance classes. This is in-school workshops or community-based activity. Okay. So, for instance, the matinee today, we had the teen mothers group from the hut we're in. They've come every year because of the subsidised buses. Now, if the buses weren't there, they wouldn't come. It's but they're not an ability to pay for it. Again, similarly with the participation that we have across the region from the likes of 4 schools coming in from Wainuiomata today. They're not there to pay for. They're not like taking private ballet classes.
Okay, thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Fitzsimons.
Thank you, and thanks for all the work that you do. I guess I was just going to ask, do you accept that a sinking lid won't mean your funding is cut?
What we find, and I've seen this situation in Auckland where there's been a sinking lid policy in some areas. What you find is that the funders make choices. The pressures get greater, and funders make choices. Invariably, arts is one of the first things to go. particularly if there is pressure on social services and similar. So we would argue that arts is part of, is a core aspect of life and well-being. But when you make those decisions, and there is real pressure, particularly in the social areas, that's the experiences that the arts go first.
Thanks. And my other question really is, most people that have come to speak with us have raised similar issues, like very compelling programs they run, which are obviously very, likely to be very widely supported, particularly for groups that might not otherwise access the arts. And as you've said, I guess, but they've also said that they do feel uneasy about taking this money and don't feel great about it. Is that kind of how you feel as well?
I think,
given the harm it causes in families and in the community.
We acknowledge that, and we know that gambling is, causes social harm, particularly for problem gamblers. And for my own personal situation, I've got that in the family. I've got that in a family background. But similarly, I can also see that if you're looking at reform of the sector, you've actually got to look at reform across the board. So in the instance of the Class 4 machines, there are profits being returned to the community, where other forms of gambling don't do that. Sky City, the return on gambling there is very, very small. If you look now at the gambling online, which we're seeing a great increase there's no return to the local communities. So I think that if there is a mood for reform, then it needs to be looked at reform across the gambling sector more broadly.
Okay, looks like we've come to the end of the 10 minutes, but thank you both so much for coming in. Ngā mihi kia korua.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to welcome Mino Cleverley, and I think Jocelyn is here as well. Do you both want to come up? Talofa, kia ora. Oh, Mino's not here. Sorry, you can come up too. Yeah, you can both come up. Kia ora. Sorry. Thank you so much for coming in. We've got the Pacific Advisory Group submission on page 130. And thank you both for taking the time to come and speak with us today. And so you've got 10 minutes and there could be some questions in that time as well. Thank you.
Well, firstly, my apologies. I was initially supposed to be the support person to the primary speaker. I think he's still on his way, but Fulalangi has stepped in here on behalf of the Pacific Advisory Group. Again, just following up on a submission that was made by the group based on a presentation by Jim Lewis. See you again, Jim. A very confounding presentation to us, and the team overall have agreed with the sinking lid option, and our reasons behind that is really around the implications on problem gambling, particularly around our Pacific people. It is a really prevalent issue. It is growing, and that is really our primary concern around why we chose the sinking lid option. There was a presentation prepared specifically by Mino. I don't have that with me, but I guess this is really, in a nutshell, what we were going to present to you today. So I'll put it back to the table for any questions.
Fantastic, thank you. So Councillor Matthews has a partai. It's a question.
Kia ora korua. The last hearing session we had a presentation from Mapumaya, who do work counselling with Pacific problem gamblers, and they had some demographic information that showed, a clear link of a higher number of pokie machines correlated with higher Pacifica populations in Wellington. So I just kind of wanted to ask you how you feel about that. What's your response to sort of knowing that this industry is really focused on areas where Pacifica people live?
It is deeply concerning. We're really looking at how this government in particular has been trying to deal with areas of poverty that have expressed itself in really crucial ways in the Pacific community, and really in particular congested areas. Oh, here we go. Come,
Oh, welcome, Mano Talofa. Thank you for coming in.
Sorry, Councillor, can I ask you, because Mino has just arrived, if you could repeat that question again?
You've got. Excellent. Good work. Thank you. It's all right, we've got a few minutes up our sleeves, so we're all good.
This one.
Oh.
Rayma somehow had building.
Oh no.
Run from there.
Oh.
Enjoy the rain.
Oh no, you poor thing. That's a bit frustrating. Well, you made it here on time, so that's pretty good. The clicker's just down the other end, I think. Can you see it there, Jocelyn? It's a little, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Half of the Pacific Advisory Group, the Council's own advisory group.
Into here, because we've got people online. If you want to speak into that microphone.
How does this work? What is it? Okay. Right, so unanimously, we agree with option A. And the reason is because of the harm that gambling and pokies in particular cause. Right, there we go. Option A, and 5 slides. So because, and I'm quoting here, Pacific people in New Zealand are a minority ethnic group identified in national prevalence studies as having the highest risk of developing gambling problems. So we're vulnerable and we're at risk, particularly of gambling. Now I want to show some slides from this PowerPoint because I think it's quite succinct. All right. This is 2018. I'm happy to share the PowerPoint. It's got more information. Yeah. So Māori and Pacific adults are more likely to be problem gamblers. For Pacific people, it's about 7.6% compared to the population average of 1.8%. So that's about 5 times more chance of becoming a problem gambler amongst our communities. Right, and 50% of pokies are located in high deprivation areas. Perhaps not so bad in Wellington, but you'll find a lot in South Auckland because we are prey. When you don't have much hope in life and you've got juggling so many priorities, $20 on a pokey, which may end up to be more, could be some respite. There are 5 times as many pokies in the poorest areas of New Zealand. So we're preyed upon. Through a Pacific lens, 8% of the Pacific population develop gambling problems compared to 2.5. I think the statistics speak for themselves. And the most harm is caused by pokie machines. The blue line is pub pokies, the orange line is club pokies. And that's my PowerPoint. So the proponents of pokie machines will say, well, we distribute so much to sporting organisations and charities. That's what they say, I've heard it. But little comes to us. And I think the problems, the challenges, the deprivation caused to our communities by pokie machines and gambling far, far outweighs any benefits.
We have got some questions for you, so if you want to go and sit next to Jocelyn, we can ask some questions. Do you want to repeat your question? I might be worth, yeah, thank you. Kia ora. No, you're not yet.
Thank you. The question I asked earlier, which I was actually trying to help Jocelyn out, but I still want to know the answer. Is we had a presentation from Mapumaya last week where actually they did analysis of where the pokie machines are in Wellington, and they strongly correlate to higher Pacifica population areas. So I guess, so I was kind of asking how you feel about that. I mean, given especially the greater proportion of Pacifica gamblers who have a problem.
Well, as I said before, I think we're being preyed upon. It's all about profit. Wellington City Council boundaries go as far as Tawa, and I've seen we were given the PowerPoint. So the concentration of poker machines in low deprivation areas, although we have them in Newtown and those places, we talked about that, but not as many as Pororoa. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
We've got a question from Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora Mina, Jocelyn, and your support friend. I was just wondering, Pastor Sai talked a wee bit to us about the health concerns and the implications that gambling has on a whole family, not just the person. And I'm wondering if you could share a bit about your thoughts or the impacts on families, Pacifica families in particular.
Because we tend to live in large family groups, intergenerationally, so you may have children, parents and grandparents in one household, and generally low income, the cash loss of gambling has a great effect if you've only got few earners. Yeah, so the problems are exacerbated.
Kia ora. Thank you. Deputy Mayor Free.
Yeah, look, we keep getting told how the children are benefiting from these programs that are funded with pokie money. But I was going to ask you what you think the effect is on the children and the families where the money's being sucked out of, basically.
I'll just go back one step.
Yeah.
We have low uptake of these programs.
Yeah, so you're not getting the benefit.
No, we're not.
Communities are not getting the benefits. So what we're saying is harming the children from those communities.
Yes.
But not benefiting them.
No. So there are studies that have shown the behaviour of mothers particularly affects our children in Mokopuna. I think that's devastating when the role modelling of parents sitting at a pokie machine or whatever form of gambling it is observed by our young people.
Thank you. And we've got a question from Councillor Rush.
Thanks very much, Mina. I'm just wondering, you mentioned that the pokies are more widespread in more deprived areas. I think fast food restaurants are the same.
Yes.
Is the answer to provide better outcomes, economic independence for Pacifica and broadly wider community, or is there a psyche element to Pacifica people that particularly makes them vulnerable?
I think it's all of that. It's a multifaceted challenge. I think raising standards of living is a big help, but we come with our own dispositions. For instance, we will try traditional medicine first before we go to the hospital, so we're late at presenting. It's education, it's a whole range of things, and I think targeting one aspect is not the solution.
Enough, thanks, good answer.
Yeah.
Well, tēnā koutou, whakawhetai. Thank you so much for coming in and talking to us and sharing your experience. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Nau mai Terry Shubkin from Yes Market. Welcome, Terry. Thank you for coming in, Terry. So, Terry, you've got 10 minutes and there could be some questions in that time. So if you've got some time, that'd be great. Thank you.
Well, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Terry Shubkin ahau. My name is Terry Shubkin. I'm the Chief Excitement Officer for Young Enterprise, and I'd like to thank you for allowing me to come speak to you today. What I want to do, and I'm going to make sure I allow some time for questions, is maybe just tell you a little bit about, I guess, the benefit that does come with some of the funding we receive. Tell you about the current situation we are in right now, because we will reflect a lot of charities, and then leave some time for questions. So for those that don't know us, we are a charity. We've been going for 39 years. And our job is actually, we always talk about preparing young people for business and life. And so most people know our flagship program, the Young Enterprise Scheme, where students set up and run an actual business while they're still in school. Real profits and services, real products and wealth, real learning opportunities. And what we say is this is really useful, especially in this COVID-19 world we're living in, because yes, we might create some entrepreneurs who create jobs, but actually a lot of what we do is create skills that are making young people work ready, more employable, and better at the jobs they do. And in the current COVID-19 world, you have that middle ground of helping them create that side hustle because they can't afford to make ends meet with the salaries they're on. What most people don't really realize is that we actually start our programs in junior secondary and we staircase in it. So, nationwide, we work with about 85% of secondary schools and tens of thousands of students every year. Our flagship program itself, the Young Enterprise Scheme, has about 4,000 students nationwide and about 350 here in Wellington. We are both geographically and diverse in every way you can imagine. Of the top 30 Pacifica schools, we currently work with 24 of them, and that's grown from about 7 about 8 years ago. We work with Kota Kaupapa schools, we work with teen parent units, and we even work with the Hawke's Bay Prison to help the young men going through that program. So, I won't go into any more the benefit that we get, but we know that what we're doing is we're trying to prepare young people to have more success later in life. In terms of my funding, just to let you know, we are about 1/3 government, 1/3 corporate, about 20% grants, and then other bits and pieces. The Lion Foundation is my largest funder. They generally give me $400,000. Last year they gave me $500,000, and this year we dropped to $320,000. Just to give you an idea of the environment we're in as a not-for-profit sector, I lost $420,000 this year because of COVID-19. It was hard. It was the drop from Lion Foundation. We had dropped in contract revenue, and I had about $160,000 drop in sponsorships. That is really hard. We've made up for it by basically cutting programs, some that we didn't want to do and some that we couldn't deliver because of lockdown. Not necessarily a good thing. We had got the wage subsidy, and I found other cost savings. So I cut about $35,000 of sales and marketing, about $27,000 out of HR and salary costs. And the rest, I'm lucky enough that I have reserves. It gets worse next year. I'm currently looking at a potential drop of another $145,000 from sponsors who have basically said to us, we have to pull out because we have no money, or we have to reduce our costs. So that's about 4 pulling out, 3 reducing their costs. I subsidize with international work. That's out the door. So that's a $55,000 drop next year. So it's hard. And I've got $250,000 of government contracts that they're saying to us, we love what you do, but actually our fund no longer exists, or the money was spent on COVID-19. We don't know if we'll renew you for next year. So I guess just sharing with you, it is a hard time to ask people to start looking for other funding right now. I'm conscious of time, just over 5 minutes, and I know that you guys will have lots of questions, so I might hand over to the councillors.
Thank you. I do have a question. So I guess you talked about doing some work with people in prisons to help them, get into work. I guess for some people, gambling is part of the thing that leads them to prison. That the harm that comes from that can lead to that. So I guess I wonder, obviously that makes people feel uncomfortable having to be on the receiving side, and we're creating this crazy cycle of needing that to help people. Whether you are interested or are working with other organisations who are also trying to grapple with the same issue around funding, that we're actually coming together and having this discussion as groups together would be helpful to try and work on government having a different approach to that.
And I guess I do talk to a lot of my fellow CEOs, and it's certainly not to diminish the harm. I'm a firm believer in education is the long-term solution. I appreciate that doesn't necessarily help short-term and people that are currently in crisis right now. What I would say is I do get frustrated, my fellow CEOs, we get frustrated hearing that just go find some more money. If it was that easy, we would. I have a dedicated sponsorship manager and a CEO. I probably spend half my time begging and chasing money. So if it was easy, not. So yeah, I'm not trying to diminish the harm, but I'm sort of saying, we have a situation, and the gentleman 2 times ago, pointed out there's a lot of other forms of gambling that doesn't go back into the community and do good. So I guess would probably be my response on that, if that answers your question.
Thank you. It is a bit of a broken system, isn't it? Councillor Paul.
Kia ora, thank you, and thank you for all the work you do. I believe I did the YES program less than 10 years ago.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Oh, we should get you join the alumni program.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to ask, now my question's gone out of my head. We've heard a lot about the personal impact that it has on families and young people who've grown up and experienced the impacts of problem gambling. But what would you say your program offers to people who maybe have those experiences in terms of like development or what kind of skills it equips them with maybe?
Yeah, that's a really good one. And so probably what I didn't touch on is, in addition to our business programs, we actually do financial literacy as well. So for example, I had one of my team yesterday spend the whole day out at the Curtis School working with financial literacy programs. And so that is around budgeting, risk management, understanding, insurance, your whole range. So, again, long term, I would hope if we're doing our job well, that people are well educated to make the right decisions for themselves. We have seen situations with some of our financial literacy programs, like we had a great story of 2 out of teen parent units, only just because we've just done some reporting on that, where one young woman went home and actually got excited, so did a budget with her partner for the first time ever. And we've had other stories of young people going home and doing one of our budgeting workshops and then going home and showing mom and dad how to do it. So that would be my hope, is that, sometimes change comes from the young, and that might help. Yeah.
I've got a part-eye question from Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, I also loved Young Enterprise.
Oh, did you do it as well?
Yes.
Oh, excellent.
3 years in a
Another
row.
alum, thank you.
We sold various things.
You won't confess what they are.
I'm not interested in talking about it. I guess I'm interested in how, or whether you've looked at kind of what happens in the places that do have a sinking lid, because I'm a bit worried that the problems are being the problems for organisations might be a little bit overstated, and that actually, unfortunately, in my view, the impacts are quite slow.
Yeah.
So have you kind of looked at that? Because there are 22 councils around the country that do have them already, and it hasn't been the end of the world.
And in fairness, I don't have the stats and the data, so my apologies. So it's probably more anecdotal, talking to some of my colleagues. So I know that there are some organizations in Auckland that have really suffered. This year is much worse, but they've had this kind of slowly, sinking lid income stream that they're really struggling with. And I've heard stories of people having to cut back or make people redundant as a result. And the other anecdotal, again, appreciate that it's anecdotal, I can't give you specific stats, is around Christchurch, and I guess that's probably the bigger concern is, something major happens and you have this policy and suddenly you could potentially lose half your venues in one go. But my apologies, I don't have the data. It's more just talking to my colleagues out there where we periodically get together and just go, oh God, how bad is money for you this year?
Any other part-eye? Oh, kia ora. Thank you, Terry. You've been very helpful in sharing that with us, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you very much. And so can I just ask, because I've got 58 seconds, anyone else do Young Enterprise when they were in school? No? 3 years in a row. You're a little bit old. We go up to 18. You can mentor, though, if you're interested. Yeah, good point. I might be in touch with you two to join our alumni program.
Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you so much.
So we've got from the Creative Capital Arts Trust, we've got Drew James here. Kia ora, Drew. Thank you. And the Creative Capital Arts Trust submission is on page 143. You can see we've got Tim here and someone else as well. Kia ora.
I'm just going to introduce Tim Brown to speak.
Cool, awesome, thank you. So yeah, you've got 10 minutes and there could likely be some questions if you want to allow a bit of time.
Great, thank you very much, councillors and Chair. So for those who don't know the Creative Capital Arts Trust, which I'm sure is hopefully no one in this room, we provide the annual Fringe Festival Cuba Duper, Classical on Cuba, and we've actually got a couple of other festivals coming your way this year. So we're very active in what you might describe as the community, participatory, innovative, startup type arts sector. Our largest source of funding is Wellington City Council, either directly or through Wellington NZ. Our second, the main source of funding is Creative New Zealand, which of course is funded 100% by by lottery. And then third is other trusts. So gambling features quite prominently in our sources of funding. And then below that we have benefaction, commercial sponsorships and other arrangements. The way, as I'm sure you're aware, that the trust funding works is that we apply for specific grants in respect of specific parts of our work, and last year we got about $170,000 for a whole range of things to do with both all of our festivals. And if we didn't get that funding, then we would have to cut those services by $170,000. I mean, there's no possibility that we would be able to find an alternative source of funding, because we work extremely hard to get funding at present, and if we lose a chunk of funding, there's nothing else to sort of fill the bucket, so to speak. So our festivals would be that much reduced, which is in the order of magnitude about 20% of what we spend effectively comes from that source, not including the Creative New Zealand Lotto funding. So it would have a very material impact on the festivals that we do produce for Wellington. I'd like to make just a very brief comment about Lion Foundation in particular, who are one of our major sponsorship providers, and that is just about the professionalism which they've always evidenced. I mean, obviously there is an element of Wild West in the pokie trust sector across New Zealand, but that particular trust, I would really recommend that they're worth looking at. It just as the other one, the Wellington Community Trust, is in the same sort of vogue, really, is you've got a couple who are exceptionally well managed. We made a submission to the Department of Internal Affairs review of the trusts a couple of years ago, and last year I met with Tracy Martin, who at that stage was the Minister of this area, to talk about the sector. And it is obviously an area where there are some loose ends, but the thing is there are clearly some of the trusts that are very well managed. Interestingly enough, what Tracy Martin raised was the issue of geofencing, and I guess you've heard people mention it today around leakage, that if you close down a venue, doesn't really change the amount that is actually gambled, also just move it out of the regulatory space, and in fact often to areas where there's no community benefit at all. So one thing I think that Wellington City Council might want to think about is not so much sort of limiting what goes on and the provision, but actually look at ways of actually reducing the harm, which isn't necessarily the provision. And it's there's a very significant difference that if people are going to gamble, but they're now going to gamble online, then there's no benefit to the community, at least if it's done physically. You, A, can regulate it, and B, the community gets a slice of it. I also actually went earlier this year, as it happens, with Justin Lester down to Loves Data and looked at the data information around pokies, because it is something which I have a sort of moral qualms about, as I'm sure people around this room do. And it was really interesting to see again how that is actually done. So, it's a complicated issue, which the conversation with Justin and also the conversation with Tracy Martin emphasised that merely reducing what is happening in a physical sense in Wellington may make you feel good, but it may actually have absolutely no beneficial impact at all in terms of the amount of gambling, and may stop at least some sort of part of the funds that are actually lost in that through those avenues being recycled into the community. And I think that actually the funding that we get, the $170,000, we put to very broad use. A lot of people benefit out of our festivals. They're very open access, and we're trying to make them even more open. And I think it would be a terrible shame if we were to forego that funding and our festivals had to actually shrink. So that's the basic gist of where we're coming from. So I think you'll obviously look at harm and benefit. I think that we would say that the Wellington community, at a very wide range, gets a lot of benefit out of the funding that we get from the trust.
You ready for some questions? So we've got a Pātaia question from Councillor Young.
Well, I have to ask you a question, don't I? So there are reports that the gaming trusts have already started cutting back on Wellington donations because the council is looking at the sinking lid policy. I think there's a rowing club that's had its application turned down. Have you had any signs of that yet, or do you do annual funding? Because those on annual funding generally haven't noticed it yet, but those who are on smaller amounts more often are.
We're in the early stages of our process, so we've currently got applications in that we're waiting on, so
Right.
it's very difficult for us to answer that at this point.
Okay.
But we certainly hope that that's not the case.
Yeah, me too. I mean, keep a duper. It's
Because it does, I mean, those kinds of things really does, put the festival at risk. The kinds of things that are funded are infrastructural a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so things like
the boring backroom stuff.
road management, all of those, the temporary road management, all of those kinds of things
Yeah.
are the things that are funded.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. You mentioned you got some funding from Creative New Zealand. Do you get funding from any other government department or agency?
As far as central government, Creative New Zealand is the main source of income, and not it's kind of irregular as well.
Yeah.
So it depends on the applications we put in. This year we have had funding from the Domestic Events Fund.
Okay. And so, is there any requirement on you? Because often when funds are given, sometimes there's restrictions on what funds can be used for and then and other aspects. And I'm just wondering, do they ever ask for you, if they'll fund an event, that it's not also funded through other means, such as agencies that might get their funds through gambling?
Generally, what we do is we provide a full budget
Yeah.
for every one of our events to each of the funders, and so it becomes part of that overall funding mix, and
Yes.
so they're aware of.
So government, the Creative New Zealand is not saying to you, look, we'll only fund you if you don't get funding from the Lion Foundation or anything like that.
With Creative New Zealand, most of the funding we get from them, we're a conduit. So it doesn't so much come to us. We actually, for instance, with Fringe, we pass the funding on to the Fringe shows.
Yeah.
Having said that, there are targets that in those budgets that we have to meet, and there are ratios that Creative New Zealand have internally about how they fund events on the basis of per seat subsidy. Most of which we, because of the nature of our particular festivals, either being free or very low cost, that ratio is generally very low.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rush.
Thanks, Drew. Just talking about the, I think you're referring to the system whereby scooters are able to be remotely geofenced. That's it, yeah. Thank you very much, Councillor. I'm just wondering, can we really identify a particular part of our community as being not trusted to gamble, as opposed to another one who we deem are trusted to gamble?
So
I have some considerable difficulty. I know that your intention is good, and I certainly, it's been mentioned to me as well, but I struggle with discriminating against people like that. How do I get around that?
Well, no. It's not really discrimination. It's not like, it's not like a bracelet that forces you to stay at home. It's not that sort of home detention type thing. I mean, what Tracy Martin was talking to us about was she said the United Kingdom, for instance, geofences the whole country. And what it means is that if you're living in the UK, everyone see those bads, WinBet, ads and things, where if people are looking to go online to bet on, Spurs beating Manchester United or something tomorrow, then they have to do it on a local platform, which means that actually the local platform is then regulated and taxed by the UK authorities. And it's the same with the United States. There was a very high-profile case a year or two ago where an English guy who was running a global internet gambling happened to actually transit through an airport in Florida and got arrested and thrown into jail for like 10 years. So the thing is that, if Wellington wanted to, I'm not saying, this isn't about excluding anybody from gambling. It's just saying that if you do so and you want to be able to regulate and tax it, then you can physically or electronically, you can say that if you're doing it within this space, we can regulate everything look, I personally have never I don't know how to gamble online. I don't know, but if anybody does it, they are basically precluded from doing it outside of the zone.
Okay, so you weren't saying that people in Newtown can't have pokies?
No,
okay, that's fine.
No.
I appreciate that clarification.
Actually, we're eastern suburbs. Those people out there, they're incorrigible. We've got to be stopped.
Well, tēnā koutou, thank you so much for coming in to kōrero with us. We appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to welcome Ross Jameson from the Hub, Toitu Pōneke. Kia ora, Ross.
Kia ora, everybody. Oh, thank you, mate. Well done.
So have you got a presentation, have you? Oh, it looks like it's coming up. Here we go.
Am I looking in? Oh, push. Oh.
I'll accept the buttons over there.
Oh, thanks, mate. Thank you.
Thanks, Cyrus.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you. So you've got 10 minutes, Ross, and there will likely be questions in that time.
No problems. Thank you very much. And I do have a presentation. It's about 10 slides. It's about 6 or 7 of them are pretty pictures and give you a summary of the Hub just to remind you of what we do. And then the last 2 are actual financial information so we can get down to the nitty-gritty and what the impact of community trust funding is on the Hub. But firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to give an oral submission. I represent the 7 member clubs of Toitu Pōneke and the 1,900 members and families that represent those clubs, known as the Hub in Kilburnie. And now we're submitting in support of option C, which is the status quo. Since the concept of the Hub in 2011, with the strong support of this council and the community, we opened our doors, and since 2018 we've had remarkable success and stability. We've actually grown community use of the venue by a staggering 763%. Over the last 2 years, which is quite a staggering number. And that's due to our governance, our community programs, our accessibility, and the fact that we're a stable financial entity. These include sport, health, family, social, community, cultural, and faith-based groups and activities. And I'm not showing you the screen. I'm just talking to my own little world here. Sorry, I'll carry on now. It's a bit hard to see there, but that's our venue on Kilburnie Park, and you can see the 2 photos below demonstrate the status we were in 7 or 8 years ago, and it was a crumbling mess, to be honest, and it was either fight or flight. That is a photo taken 4 or 5 months ago, which is a modern, fit-for-purpose venue attracting thousands of Wellingtonians each and every week. So here's our clubs, about 1,900 members. We've got Pōneke Football, PK Softball, the Wellington Diving Club, which, funny enough, it's a water sport, but it's our second biggest user of the venue for dryland. They teach the kids proficiency of a dive in a dryland on a harness before they throw them in the water where they could break their necks. So it's tremendous to have that facility right beside the aquatic centre. The Darts Club, which I can tell you joined us with 90 people. They now got 180 members. Smog Netball, St Mary's Netball has just joined us, the Wellington Fencing Club, and the Wolves American Football. So we're also talking to East Cricket just down the road, down the park finally, and Maris Football. And if they join us, which is looking positive over the next 2 years, we will have over 3,000 families membered as part of the Hub. That's our member clubs, but additionally we also have many other groups who use it on a community and informal basis. St John's, I won't read them out to you, but you can see there a full range of culture and opportunities and community groups. So I want to tell you that, and I can't got the exact number, but I think something in the vicinity of 8 clubs have formed in the community purely because of the existence of the Hub, which is pretty cool. You don't have to read that. I really was just pointing out the 763% figure, and prior to COVID, we were on target to grow that again by another 20 to 30% this year, and that's just focusing on the community and clubs and community groups. Just some photos, and then we'll get down to the nitty-gritty. So here's some different school groups, educational groups, the diving club there and the trampoline. Pretty picture bottom right. Doing our advertising of our clubs. Very cool brand, which is important. Kapahaka, 3 of the Kapahaka groups use the venue as their base. Yoga groups that formed, darts in action there, and of course the Pōneke Rugby Club was the starting tenant at the venue. So we're diverse in age, we're in culture and faith, we're activity-based, we have sedentary activity, just social occasions, we have people who just want to participate, We have people like Lewis Clearbird who use it as their base for high performance. We're affordable, we're welcoming, we're clean and we're safe. And last year we won the Wellington City Council Accessibility Award, which is cool too. So let's get down to the numbers. So this is the budget we had. So we started this in 2011, and you'll see that we had to raise $2.5 million to turn a crumbling building into an active, safe, vibrant community centre. So Piniki Rugby had $173,000 of savings that they'd built for this day, and they took out a $50,000 loan. Other member clubs were able to get together $10,000 from sausage sizzles, etc. The annual plan allocated about 770 of us over 2 chaunces. Thank you very much. Lotto gave us 524 grand. You can see there in yellow that Class 4 funding or community trusts gave us $1 million. That took us a range of applications over 4 years. I can tell you that was a 4-year program just to get that 2.5 million in place. And I'll be brutally honest, if it wasn't for Class 4 funding, we would not exist today. There was no other money available. The council said no more. Our member clubs couldn't do any more. Sponsorship was impossible. And I'm the chair of the Revenue Committee of the Wellington Rugby Union. I was sponsorship manager of Piniki Rugby Union for a long time. I can tell you that getting a $5,000 sponsor in sport these days is a massive win, and especially in COVID time. So to raise $1 million we would have walked away, and the hub wouldn't exist today if it wasn't for Class 4. This is our operational budget, an annual budget. This is our last 12 months. So you can see venue revenue at the front, at the top there. So our member clubs pay us about $48,000 in usage, pay as your user pays. The community, which is other groups, so the churches, the St John's Ambulance, karate clubs, judo clubs, fencing, etc. $47,000. We have a lot of family funerals, sadly, weddings and 21st and things like that as well, family celebrations. Then business give us about $48,000 a year as well. So we're talking the Wellington City Council comes into that. They have some conferences there, which is much appreciated, Sport New Zealand, etc. That gives that sort of money. $164,000 from Class 4 funding roughly each year. Our food and beverage operations, which we run quite cheaply for our members, don't give us too much, and then other like sponsorship, etc. And that goes to paying our 1.5 staff, our building lease, and our keeping the lights on costs. So we largely wash our face due to the community trust funding. If it disappeared or it reduced, we would have to change our forms of operation. There's no other real way to do it. We'd have to put our prices up to the community, which would limit the amount of people who were able to access the venue. We'd have to probably release one of our staff and probably, I would say, become an intermittent opener. So not 7 days a week would be one of the impacts we would have to do. Just finally, COVID's been challenging. We had a little bit of reserves we put together that kept us alive. We got the wage subsidy. Our staff took a pay cut. Our landlord gave us 50% for 3 months. We had no trust funding and no activity, no venue hire fees for 3 or 4 months. The month after we reopened, we actually got a trust grant that was able to pay some of our deferred invoices. We probably would have closed the door if it hadn't been for that one grant in the last 2 months. So I can open up to questions now. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first question is from Councillor Pennant.
Thanks very much for coming in and for the great work that you're doing for the community. Look, what we know about pokie money is that it's decreasing over time, irrespective of sinking lid policies and all the rest of it. So I was just wondering if you've done any thinking about what you'll do, given, as it decreases, what you'll do to replace the funding.
It's topical for our board. Yeah, we talk about it all the time. We would like to be less reliant on it. Right now, and I think over probably 4 to 5 years, I think we can get there, being a bit less reliant, but the venue would have to come a little bit more commercial. And we're still on Reserve Act land, and we're not allowed to do that. So we have to be very, very careful what we can do. Otherwise, we're actually in breach of this table. So look, it's topical, but right now we're heavily reliant at about a 47% mark for that funding, probably for the next 3 years at least.
Yeah. Kia ora. Looks like that's all the questions, but thank you so much, Ross, for taking the time to come and
Thanks, everybody.
with us. All right, we can have a break now. Our next submitter is at 3:50, so just under half an hour, 25 minutes. Have some afternoon tea, and we'll come back in time to be underway at 3:50. Kia ora. We'll get back underway. So to start with, I'd like to welcome Tofa Whaaloa. Tofa here at this point. Not here. You check with the... Hi Tofa, thank you for coming in.
Kia ora.
So Tofa, you've got 5 minutes, and I'll just point out the timer is up there just to help you know where your timing is at.
Okay.
And there may be a few questions if there's time within that 5 minutes.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'll start now.
Yep, you can start.
Kia ora, talofa lava, City Council members. Thank you for the opportunity to present my submission. My name is Tofa Whaaloa. I come before you as a proud Wellingtonian and also as a member of Wellington's Pacific community. I am in favour of a sinking lid policy that includes TAB venues with no relocations or mergers. Many speakers before me have highlighted statistics that show the negative impact that gambling, and particularly pokies, has on the Pacific population, with a noticeable number of these machines placed in areas which are densely populated by Pacific people. Given the overrepresentation of Pacific people in the use of these machines and the devastating impact it can have on our families and communities, it makes sense to implement a sinking lid policy. Other submitters have talked to the impact on their fundraising efforts for their clubs and other activities. I think as a society we should actually question the ethics of receiving money from a source that clearly disadvantages those who are already suffering. I've heard submissions which quote the number of Māori in Pacific who are positively impacted as they are able to be part of the activities that are funded in this way. I admittedly have not been able to access the stats reflecting that, but in looking at some of the groups against the sinking lid policy, I would question the percentage and therefore the positive outcomes for our Māori, Pacific and disadvantaged communities when weighed against the harm. A previous comment made regarding one's individual choice does not take into account the addictive nature of pokies. Whereas initially it is an individual's choice, the addiction that takes over is not. Throughout my career as a registered nurse in mental health, almost 20 years, where I've worked across the board in relation to secondary and community-based services, the impacts in terms of breaking down the family unit, homelessness, mental health issues, isolation and so on are too high a price to pay. Surely there are other ways. I can vouch that when an individual group needs funds for activities, we reach out to our networks via social media and word of mouth to raise funds through selling of suppers and island foods, just as an example. These types of activities strengthen our networks and actually communities through building upon relationships and reciprocity. I imagine most people would have connections that would be more than willing to offer financial support if asked. There can be other options for clubs and organisations to consider raising funds. One may argue that a gambler can choose to seek help. However, shame is a big factor, and for Pacific people, to bring shame upon one's family is always something that is considered. From what I have seen, the discreet nature of gambling ends up seeking help when the damage is already significant. Funding from a source that exploits others should never be an option, and we must act to mitigate the risks where possible. In these socially conscious times, it is not okay to continue like this. I do hope that you vote to implement the sinking lid policy. I would like to acknowledge your time and consideration of all the submissions. Whawhatai lava.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, well, that was really short.
You did
Okay.
really well. Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Matthew has a question for you.
Sure. Thank you, Tofa. We've heard from a lot of people that that if we don't have pokies anymore, or we have fewer pokies, that everybody will kind of it'll go to online gambling. And have you got any comment about that? Do you think there's something about, going out to the pokies that is more attractive to people that you've seen, or?
I don't know what the statistics are with regards to that. Online gambling means that you need access to internet. For some of our families, that's an issue. So actually, that may be a bit of a barrier. I don't know. I can't really, other than to say that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to come in and talk with us today. We appreciate you doing that.
Yeah.
No mai kia ora fua ai le ngai heiga. So kia ora no, hello again. Thank you for
I think before it was mistaken identity.
Yeah. Thank you for coming in today. So you've got 5 minutes and there may be some questions.
Okay, kia ora. Just also a correction, there's a spelling mistake in there, which may be why
I said it wrong.
was.
You can correct it.
Fuailelagi.
E-L-A.
Oh, so good. So it's Fuailelangi.
Fuailelangi. Beautiful, thank you.
Excuse me. O te whaatalo whātu lau sunga le taitai whono, whaapea le pa ia ma le mamalu o le au whono whaipule o Wellington i nei. Ki te hea mana o te hui nei tēnā koe. Ki ngā mema o te kaunihera o Pōneke, tēnā koutou. Ngā mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa i tēnei wā. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to my submission today. My name is Fuailelangi. Although I made the submission as an individual, I'm not here alone. I'm a member of the Wesley Methodist Parish and a member of the parents group at the E Whakasa Newtown o Ngā Mata. I also work at the coalface with those directly affected by gambling-related harm in my role as a counsellor and health promoter for Mapumaya. However, the views that I present here are my own and not that of the organisation that I work for. I am speaking to support option A, a sinking lid policy that would include poker machines in TAB venues, no relocations and no mergers. A policy that I think is one step of a multi-pronged approach to addressing the harms of gambling in our community. Like many other Pacific parents, my parents came to Aotearoa with the hope of a better life for my siblings and I, our children, and our extended ainga both here and in Samoa, a hope that we continue to hold. I am here for those in my community who share that same hope, who live in high deprivation areas because that is where our families can afford to live, in areas where prolific poker machines, it seems, can also afford to live in our neighbourhood. Machines that are enticing with their cheerful melodies and gleaming lights, offering a promise of good fortune that plays to our hope for a better life, like the Venus flytrap with its bright colour and sweet-smelling nectar, then closing in on their prey, trapping them. Machines that are insidious because they're designed to take your money and create an addiction that has an impact on all facets of one's life and hauora, or health and well-being. Ki te taha hinangaro, our mental well-being, te taha wairua, our spiritual well-being, te taha tinana, our physical well-being, me te taha whānau, our social and our family well-being. An addiction that can be lifelong and span across generations. These machines are breaking our families. Others have shared about the bright side of the moon, providing programs and opportunities for some in our community. Yet it draws that brightness from the dark side of the moon, where families are plunged into that darkness, experiencing financial despair, destruction of relationships, secrecy and deception, self-loathing, self-criticism, shame and stigma, and self-harm. The list can go on. Does that seem just? Ngā mema o te kaunihera o Pōneke, members of the council, this is my humble plea to you. Be brave, draw a line in the sand, use the power you have to influence change and do right by those who I am here for, who I serve, and those in my community who chose you to represent them. Gambling harm cannot be addressed alone. You can help, I can help. Let us work together to do so, here and now. For if not now, then when? And if not you and me, then who? Nā te roro, nā ku te roro, ka ora i te iwi. With your food basket and my food basket, our children... sorry. Our ainga, our families, our community will thrive. Sorry, I'm just... please adopt a comprehensive sinking lid policy that would include poker machines in TAB venues, no relocations and no mergers. I lo ua lava ma le whaalualo, whawetai lava mo le awanua. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Whaawhitai, thank you so much for coming in to talk with us and to share your perspective and your experience. We really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We've run out of time for questions, but we really appreciate you sharing.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I'd like to welcome Adam Parker from Hospitality New Zealand. Nau mai, Adam, kia ora.
Do you have a presentation? If I can pop that on the screen if anyone wants to view it. Do that. Don't notice, but...
Thank you. Can't find the number. I don't have a page number on mine either. What, do we know what the page number is for that submission?
This one was circulated separately.
Oh, actually, this was sent through. I remember it came through, I think, this morning?
Today.
This morning. Just came through by email. Just wait for that to come up. There. Right, it looks like we've got it up now. We're all ready to go.
Perfect, thank you. I am joined today by our National President, Jeremy Smith, who will also be making some comments. Jeremy?
Yeah, I thought, thank you, and apologies for climbing on the bandwagon here. I'm a small business owner and obviously over the years had gaming in our venues. I think some of our energies and efforts need to be put into areas where we can actually make a difference. And in all honesty, gaming is very much a central government controlled industry. The government generates around $300 million in gaming through taxes and other fees. I think, so when we look at making changes here, we can pull a couple of levers. But if you look at the industry where over the last sort of 7 or 8 years, 10,000 machines have come out of the gaming sector, the Class 4 gaming sector, and yet the percentage of people with problem gaming hasn't really changed. And that's because we're just one piece of a bigger puzzle. There is online gaming, there's casinos, there's the TAB, there's Lotto, there's a whole lot of other areas that impact. And by having a sinking lid in Wellington, what we're going to end up doing is impacting businesses in the community without really seeing massive change. Now, we're all in favour of doing what we can to try and minimise harm. And as you probably know, gaming is a highly regulated sector with around $40 million a year going into health and to DIA to manage, to regulate, to provide support, to help with harm. The industry also highly regulated. We run a lot of training and we're just in the process of working with the DIA and MSD around developing new training programs, and a lot of this is including leadership from the business owners in terms of that early identification and support of people who are identified as being problem gamers. If you come into any of our venues, there is a very rigid process about identifying people, encouraging people to isolate, self-isolation, and so, isolation, wrong word, sorry, but getting, looking to try and work at a base level. As I said, online gaming, Tracy Martin said, during the lockdown, the percentage of online gaming increased dramatically. So it's there and it's unregulated. So our view is let's work to try and address issues in a regulated sector rather than try and break that up in the market. Just from a numbers perspective, Wellington is about 11% of the total sort of gaming sector. That means there's 32 million that goes back to the community. This is rugby clubs, sports clubs, lighting, cameras down Courtney Place, charities, schools. The list is endless. There's 12 million that goes to cover wages and operating costs of local businesses, and around 10 million to the gaming sector for machine purchases and, again, staff and operations. And in all honesty, in the time of COVID, looking to say, well, let's shut businesses down potentially and potentially reduce the amount of income coming back into the community, I don't think it's going to solve the problem. You know, if you said we could guarantee that things would suddenly be better, fine, I'll support it, but not when we're not going to see change and yet we're going to see a reduction in businesses.
Carry on if you want.
So I suppose, look, there's all kinds of stats and numbers we can throw out in terms of supporting it, but I think the general principle is that it's in some ways it's bigger than the council. I don't think by pulling a few levers is going to make a difference, and we'd rather say let's look at ways or work with us as part of the training, work with us in the venues to try and make sure that we're doing everything possible to minimise the harm. But at the same time, recognise that New Zealand is unique in the way we run Class 4 gaming, and we can't just dismiss the fact that there is in Wellington $32 million going back into good projects. And I've always been a believer that, you know, we might not always like where the money came from, but if we put it to good causes, it's actually a good use of that money. So that's, and I chair a number of different charities, and I'd rather put the money to good use and see benefit come from that. So we don't support the change, and we're very much in favour of continuing that ability to relocate, because that could be part of the levers we use of moving potential some gaming machines from one area to another without necessarily reducing the total number.
Yeah, look, I don't really have much to add to that. That's pretty much my submission in a nutshell. So I guess we'll go to questions.
Fantastic. We do have a few. We've got Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora, thank you, Adam and Jeremy. I just wondered if you could expand on, as a small business owner, do you reap financial benefits from having machines? Do you make a profit from having machines in your venues?
A good question, and it depends. It depends on the venue and depends on how busy that venue is. As a gaming machine operator from 2 years back, we get paid 13.9% of the banking, the proceeds from the gaming machines, and that goes to cover our rent for the space, staff, and all the admin and processes we need to run the gaming machine. If it's a reasonably busy room, yes, there is some proceeds on that. If it's not, it sort of washes its face, but it utilises part of our business and covers some of the staff operating costs.
Thank you. We've got a partai from Councillor Paul.
Hi, thank you for your presentation and the work that you do. From a Hospitality New Zealand perspective, what about the kind of experience that it creates for the patrons of these venues? Because it's not that pleasant being around areas where pokie machines are. You know, we heard stories of people who would urinate on themselves to hold their place at a machine. So what about patrons and their experience at these venues?
Look, I'm always a big believer that with human nature, you can regulate to a certain point. It's exactly the same with alcohol consumption. Some people drink too much. Some people don't know how to behave properly. So the gaming rooms, 99.9% of the time, are fun environments. People enjoy going in there. It's a place where people relax. It's a place where people switch off from some of their other problems and issues. It's a place where people like going, and they go there because they enjoy the relaxing or the time when they can win some money. So the percentage of people that might behave badly is tiny, and with well-trained staff, if it happens, you'll speak to the person, you'll probably ask them not to come back, or you'll ask them to go and address some of the issues and recommend that they go and get some support from the health department. So yes, it happens, but it's so rare. It's the same as, what else do we stop? Do we stop people from driving because some people don't know how to drive or break the speed limit or drink and drive? Where do we stop the line to protect people from themselves? And we're talking about a tiny percentage of the people that game. The majority of people, it's less than in terms of the gaming. Last stats I saw was about 1.5, 2% of gamers have problems with gaming addiction. Do we stop everything because of that? At what point in time do we cannot protect people from themselves?
And just to add on the back of that as well, the example that you just gave there, thank you. But that to me would say that the staff in that venue probably weren't trained correctly to mitigate that, because when staff are trained correctly, that wouldn't happen. And if we don't have these rooms, and yes, they might look certain ways in certain venues to certain people, but that's different perspectives. And I would say that, again, just as someone mentioned over here earlier on about the online gambling situation, it's probably been talked to you guys about that maybe, nearly every submission that you've got. And I would say that's just going to cause extreme problems on the online gaming world.
Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, just reflecting on your knowledge and experience, can you tell us the kind of warning signs that trained staff will be looking out for, and what sort of take us through what they'll do if they see them?
Yeah, there's types of things like interactions and interventions. So if a staff member notices that someone's been there a particular long time, or they've spent a particularly good amount of money, a targeted conversation would be an interaction, where that's regarding their behaviour. So that would be actually targeted at the individual. And then staff do actually do certain interventions where they can offer help through providing phone numbers to the staff, to the patrons, and just encouraging them with subtleties. But we can't tell them what to do at the end of the day.
So is there anything else apart from someone being there a long time that's a warning sign?
Maybe I can share with you the DIA run a mystery shopper program, and they have a series of checks. So it's number of times they come and get money, are they looking nervous or anxious, are they making comments, how often are they coming into the gaming room. So people that are sort of regular gamers, you can normally monitor and intervene. If someone's coming to the gaming room for the first time, then it's slightly more difficult to make an initial assessment, but if they come back again. But there's a series of things to look out for in the training. And again, happy to share our training with you, and happy to share the DIA Mystery Shopper program, because it's pretty comprehensive, and they run that on a fairly regular basis, where they send in actors into gaming rooms to go and assess. And it's not necessarily to try and catch us out, it's more to work with us. And so they'll go in, they'll assess rooms, they'll run through scenarios, and then they'll feedback and say, we think this area needs more attention, you've missed that, this company needs more training. As you said, we just invested $100,000 in setting up a new training program, which hopefully rolls out later this year or very early next year.
Well, Tina Korua, thank you for coming in and talking with us today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Well, now I'd like to welcome Lily Tuioti from Salvation Army Network Worship and Community Centre. Kia ora. Kia ora, Vicky. Kia ora.
Apologies from Lily. She's been called away to a funeral in Auckland.
So, sorry to hear that.
She's conducting tomorrow. So
thank you for taking her place.
You have me. I'm Major Keith Tyson. I'm one of the leaders of the Salvation Army in Newtown. I've been working in Newtown for 10 years, and 9 of those years have been at the Bridge program alongside Vicky at Oasis, and more recently I have had a role change. But in our Newtown Centre, which is based in Ridderford Street, we have an alcohol and drug rehabilitation service, the Wellington Bridge program. We have Oasis Gambling Support Program, which Vicky and her colleague runs. The Wellington Community Ministries, where we have a drop-in centre, counselling, food bank and welfare support. We also have an early childhood education centre, and we have a family store with us, which is a second-hand shop. We have a community playgroup that draws in people from the community and twice a week, and we have our church there too, which meets on a Sunday. We support the sinking lid policy to be approved and go further to say that TAB pokies should be included in this too. The clients of our programs and guests who come in to access our services are extremely vulnerable. The prominent challenge which we have identified for the majority of them is addiction to alcohol and other drugs, and addiction to gambling. These two are inextricably linked and cause great poverty for people. Our centre and church are in very close proximity to City Council housing and also to social housing, boarding houses and other emergency house accommodation. Our community members are extremely vulnerable to highly addictive forms of gambling. It's been described that pokie machines are the crack cocaine of gambling. It is highly addictive, and it's designed by psychologists to keep individuals at the machine until they have no more cash. Sports and other community groups who look to gambling profits for funding should seek other forms of support. They should take responsibility for this themselves. I was quite shocked to see that one of your former speakers from Poniki, most of his funding came from gaming machines. The government should also take responsibility for the impact that gambling has on most vulnerable and provide other means of funding for sports and community groups. We have 54 pokie machines in Newtown. I believe there's the same number over in Kilburnie. A lot of that money, apparently in Newtown, 28 million turnover came from June 2018 in 1 year. 20 million of that would have gone into the community. We don't see evidence of that going into our community, and we wonder where that money is going. Is it going to places where there are very few pokie machines in the northern suburbs, perhaps? So this money has come from the most poorest and most vulnerable people in our community, and so we would really urge people to really think about keeping the sinking lid policy going. I disagree strongly with we disagree strongly with our former speaker. We don't believe there are sufficient controls. On the issue of online gambling, many of our clients barely have enough money to run a phone, let alone do data or internet. So it's a red herring as far as we're concerned. Vicky, would you like to say something?
I've got my own time slot, so I'll speak then.
Okay.
Thank you.
We do have some partai, so we'll start with Councillor Pennant.
Thanks for coming in and for the work you do. Can you just talk to us about your experience of, presumably you don't take pokie money, so how you fund? I mean, obviously I know I've seen your fundraisers and you get government contracts, but just talk about that and how you can survive. Obviously you've got a church congregation.
Yes, we do have the Salvation Army centrally helps fund us, and we do have contracts for addiction, and also we have our regular appeals during the year. We have good donations of food, which we're able to share out on a regular basis. Anything, we're able to fund ourselves without gaming machine money. It's been like that for over 10 years. We haven't accepted gaming money. The Salvation Army's had a policy, I think it's longer than that, isn't it, Vicky?
Yeah.
It'll be about 15 years, yeah.
Kia ora, Councillor Rush.
Thanks. I think some of that money might have gone to the Paniki hub, perhaps, but the previous speaker did raise an important question about where you draw the line, and we know that fast foods, for example, are bad, but seem to be particularly attractive to our poorer communities. Smoking, all those sorts of other nasties as well, and I'm just struggling to draw a line between trying to be a good regulator, a government or whatever, but allowing people their freedoms, because, I mean, I used to work in pubs and people come in and they like playing pokies. It's, it's not my bag, and for every dollar spent, it's a waste of money. It's a gambling addiction, but people genuinely do it. So can you just maybe help me through that?
I think you partly answered the question. It's an addiction, and these machines are designed to hook people in and addict them. Most of the money comes from a few gamblers, and so the odd person who comes here and spends $20 and then walks away doesn't fund that machine, doesn't keep that machine going. It's the people that come in here who have a tendency towards addiction, who come in and spend hundreds and thousands of dollars that keep that machine going and make it viable for the business. So yeah.
I have a quick partai. There's the argument about the online gambling, which I think you've answered really well. The other thing is people say, oh, well, they'll just go and do it somewhere else. What's your perspective on that? The psychology behind what draws people to the Class 4 gambling machines?
They're designed just to you can just spend so little time and lose so much money. If you go and buy a lotto ticket, you can only buy one lotto ticket, and a lot of people do that. We don't begrudge people buying lotto tickets. We don't begrudge people betting on the horses. It's almost a sport, but gaming machines are designed by psychologists to hook people in, and as my Pacific person shared earlier, with all the bells and whistles. So it's, yeah.
Kia ora, Deputy Mayor Free.
Thank you for your expertise in the work you do. You mentioned that so much of the money is raised from people who are addicted. Are you aware of any research as to actually the type of spend that comes from a person who's addicted?
Vicky would be more aware of that.
Do you have information like that? As to,
What?
Well,
How do you mean?
Has there ever been any data collected on, so many people tend to spend $100 a week, so many people tend to spend, $200 a week?
There is research about the bulk of the money coming from people with an addiction. So we look at it, it's very roughly 20-80. So 20% of the people going to the pokies may have an addiction, but they're contributing 80% of the money. Now that's very rough, and you will be able to, but it's very...
It's ballpark figure.
Yeah. So, and conversely, 80% of the people going to the pokies only spend 20%.
Can I ask another question? Is there time? Just a very quick one. Do you have any theory as to why there are no or very few pokey machines in richer suburbs? Because we talk about distribution.
Yes, and I will be addressing that.
In yours. So, okay, that's great.
But I think, as Paul will explain with his slides in a minute, the suburbs who are richer, they have less money taken per machine. So the machines earn, on average, about 47,000. Again, I'm speaking off the top of my head, but it's about 47,000-ish per machine. But in richer suburbs, it's a lot lower. Okay, so a lot lower.
They're not that 80%. They're not that 20% contributing the 80%. No.
And also in richer suburbs, you have people who have possibly more ability to earn money in a different way.
Resources, yeah.
Yeah, they don't need to be depending on gambling to pay their bills. And some of our people, they win, so they think, oh yes, I've won there before, maybe I'll win again and I'll be able to pay my electricity. You know, people don't do things without good reason.
Mm. Well, kia ora kōrua, thank you very much for taking the time to kōrero with us today. We appreciate that. I will know my Paul Barber. Welcome, Paul. Thank you for coming in. Well, kia ora, Paul. Thank you. You've done this before, so you know how it works.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today in support of my submission. I guess I'm speaking to you today as a Wellington resident concerned about this issue, but I also work for the Salvation Army, and I'm speaking also in support of my colleagues who are the experts in dealing with day-to-day harm that gambling does in our communities. And they're the experts in the realities of what's going on for people and the realities of those impacts in Wellington. I'm speaking in support of the Council's preferred option to introduce a sinking lid policy and encouraging that to be without relocations and transfers. I'm also speaking as someone I've spent most of my life working and volunteering in the community sector, and fundraising is part of our lives in that sector, and it is a challenge, but that is not a justification to add to the harm in our communities. And I encourage the Council to do everything it can to support alternative ways for communities to be resourced other than this destructive path. One of the main point I wanted to make today in my oral submission is that I had a wee look at some of the information and data about how the impact falls on lower communities, and I compared my suburb, where I happen to live, Karori, with Newtown East, where my colleagues are speaking from. And surprise, surprise, perhaps interestingly enough, the Karori is one of the least deprived suburbs in this city, and Newtown East is among the higher deprived. Median income in Karori is $142,000 per household per year. In Newtown East, it's $82,000, so about 60% of that. There are currently 33 machines in Karori, and there were 33 machines 6 years ago, as far as I know. I can be able to quite check it. In Newtown, there are 61 machines and 4 venues, and there were 3 6 years ago, according to what I was able to find out. In Karori, the gaming proceeds per quarter. This little, I'm looking at comparing December 2013 with December 2019 to avoid the COVID impact, but that was $100,000 per head per capita in Karori per quarter. In Newtown East, $370,000 per quarter, nearly 4 times as much. So who's paying for those gambling losses? And according to the information, we note that per machine in Karori, about 37,000 is lost per machine. In Newtown, it's about 40,000. So I can supply them afterwards if you like. I just didn't bring my slides. I thought I'd avoid death by PowerPoint today. So that for me just alone says something that, as a concerned person, that the wrong people are paying for what's happening in our communities. It's an unfair source of funding. If you just reminding, of course, that 40 million is lost per year in Wellington. About 10 million, apparently slightly under 10 million, is paid out in grants from the trusts. But if you think that 2/3 of the machines, or 83% of the machines, are located in medium to high deprivation areas, they're losing most of that 40 million, and they certainly won't be getting all of that 10 million back. So, and I guess the other point I want to make is one reason why that by having a sinking lid, it's been pleasing. I just want to say it's been pleasing to see that the number of venues and machines has been declining in Wellington. But in order to continue that decline, you're going to have an active policy of reducing the cap and enforcing that. And that can only be achieved with a targeted sinking lid policy. The venue that opened in Newtown was presumably a transfer. I don't know the details. But if you allow transfers, where are they going to transfer to? And that's just one example from our city. Probably some of the other suburbs might have similar stories to tell. Yeah, I'm urging you today to please go ahead with a strong sinking lid policy. And as someone from the community, you have my full support. Thank you.
Well, kia ora. Thank you so much, Paul, for taking the time to come into kōrero with us. We appreciate you doing that.
Yeah.
I will know my anō to Vicky Hirani from Salvation Army Oasis. Kia ora anō. So, you know how it works, 10 minutes. I'm sure there will be some more questions.
Tēnā tātou katoa. The suburbs of the highest number of pokie venues and machines per head of population, Newtown, is the most vulnerable community because of income deprivation, age and ethnicity, as shown by our previous speaker. The most vulnerable people experiencing the most deprivation suffer from the highest exploitation from pokie machines in the city. The Lion Foundation is a trust with some of the highest numbers of pokies in Wellington. Looking at their grant distributions shows us some of the problems that the present situation throw up. Lion Foundation has pokies across Wellington from Tawa to Kulbuni and throughout the central city. It has 18 machines in Newtown and 18 machines in Karori. Some other statistics that will impact these communities are that there are a further 43 machines in Newtown, which belong to other trusts and societies, and large numbers of machines in Kulbuni, just up the road. Whereas Karori has only another 15 machines in Karori and a long drive to the next community with machines. Newtown, one of the neighbourhoods with the highest deprivation in Wellington, received in grants from the Lion Foundation $22,000. $20,000 for the Newtown Festival, $2,000 for the Newtown School. The Lion Foundation, like many of, if not all the trusts and societies, do not give grants for food, which conveniently excludes them from making grants to food banks, where we find many of the people harmed from gambling trying to get help to feed their families. Karori is at the other end of the deprivation scales. Still with 18 Lions pokie machines, Lion Foundation gave the Karori Licensing Trust $103,542 to be distributed in Karori. Grants to other charities from Lions show a consistent pattern across Ngā Life Education Trust in Gisborne, East Coast and Wairoa received $5,000. Life Education Trust in Manawatu, Wanganui and districts received over 3 times that amount, $18,000. You'll be very interested in the next one. In the wider Wellington community, Wellington College Old Boys and Victoria University of Wellington Rugby Football Club Incorporated received $60,000, while Wellington Rape Crisis received $609. Let me say, the Lion Foundation are no better or worse than any other trust. TSA Oasis is funded by the Ministry of Health, and the Salvation Army does not take any money from any form of gambling to support its services to the community. We clearly see, however, we need a better way to fund things that currently relying on money from pokies. And even if pokies funding is to remain, we need better ways to achieve equitable distribution. If it must remain, we do not want pokey funding to be organised as it is. We need better ways to reduce the harm from Class 4 gambling and TAB electronic gaming machines, because what is here now just is not addressing the inequities within and between communities. Our poorest suburbs have the highest number of pokie machines, sucking out more money per machine than the richer suburbs, which anyway have less machines. And the richer communities and organisations are able to access the most funding from the proceeds from these machines, literally robbing from the poor to give to the rich. We know the council are limited in their abilities to restrict machine numbers. The sinking lid option presently offers one of the only ways to reduce the numbers of pokies. But this is a slow and inefficient way to protect the neighbourhoods in most need. Councils working closer with the Department of Internal Affairs could be a start to improving oversight of our local situations. DIA keeping council aware of opportunities where they can legitimately reduce the numbers of machines in the poorest communities is essential. In addition to retaining the sinking lid option, we encourage you to adopt better communication processes with DIA to capture more opportunities to remove pokies from our vulnerable communities. Shifting our focus briefly, a brilliant piece of research was done in South Wellington called Kids Cam by Otago University of Wellington with intermediate age students. Students wore cameras and GPS, which took photos every few seconds over a few days. What it showed was that children were being bombarded with gambling signage to promote gambling opportunities. Kids were reporting they saw way too many signs and they didn't want their younger siblings to have to see all the marketing. And again, the marketing in areas like Newtown is heavier and more damaging to the very children who we need to protect the most, because there are more Class 4 venues in the area. We encourage you to adopt policies and procedures that remove the ability of under 18s to see any materials relating to gambling. For example, do not let gambling be advertised on your bus stops and buses, and put in place restrictions on window signage for places that have gambling. We thank Council for its responsible approach to supporting a sinking lid policy for Wellington City with no relocations, and we look forward to a more equitable grant distribution system, a less damaging concentration of poker machines in our most vulnerable and poorest communities, and a removal of gambling information from public view. Thank you, and if there's any questions, I'll take them now.
Kia ora, there are a few pātai. Malcolm, Councillor Sparrow has a pātai.
Yes, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Look, it's an incredibly complex issue. If we vote in favour of the sinking lid option, and that means a reduction in the overall harm, then obviously that is a great result. But that is the big question: will it actually achieve that? We've been told, some submitters have said to us, or one submitter said, 10,000 machines have come out in the last 10 years. I guess that's throughout the whole country. However, problem gambling numbers haven't changed. And someone else said, voting for this will make us feel good, but it is not likely to have any beneficial effect at all. So in other words, reduce the number of machines won't necessarily have a bearing on the overall number of problem gamblers. How would you respond to that?
I don't think there was ever a business model done to see how many machines could be financially supported in communities. So I think there would have been a drop of machines anyway, because the way it was spread, they just couldn't be supported. There wasn't enough people in Wellington and other places. So I think there's a natural attribution, just that. Also, I think a lot of the places where machines were put were not able to be sustained. So they were in places where they weren't patronised because they weren't needed or they weren't seen as a positive thing. They weren't somewhere people with addictions would go. So you won't get very many people from Newtown going to Karori to gamble. You may get people from Karori going to Newtown to gamble because they don't want to be seen in Newtown gambling. They don't want to be seen in Karori gambling.
I have a pātai, because when you were talking about Karori not having gaming machines in other close suburbs, so obviously that has an impact on exactly what you're saying there, but also wondering in Tawa, I know that a lot of the people that do come to Tawa to gamble actually come from Porirua, and just what you can tell us a bit about that and why that happens, and then it affects the distribution when people say it goes back into the community that it comes from, what you've observed with that.
So what we know is that the closer to areas of poverty that people can put machines, the more money they will make from the machines. So it's no surprise to me that there are more machines in Tawa because it's close to Porirua. So that's not surprising. The distortion will come, though, because the money will be seen to be taken from Wellington City, not Porirua City, and so it distorts both of the demographics and the statistics for money coming in and going out. So it is a problem. Yeah.
Well, kia ora, Vicky. We've run out of time for more pātai, but thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Kia ora. So, councillors, we've just had a couple of people pull out. So our next submitter's not till 4:55, and I think we will just. Oh, sorry. I skipped down the list. Sorry, Paula. We do have you on the list. Kia ora, Paula. And then the time was also wrong. You do have 10 minutes. Not going to rob you of 5 minutes. But thank you. So Paula is the Problem Gambling Foundation representative here today, and it's page 67 for the submission. So apologies for that, Paula. We're very pleased that you're here to kōrero with us.
Tēnā te mahiniwa ki a koutou katoa ki te tangata whenua o te rohe nei a te tiawa, tēnā koutou. I ngā rai rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. My submission today is going to be short. When you work at the bottom of the cliff, like we do around the country, 4,500 clients a year, you are always looking for ways to get the ambulance up or to get a net or a fence or something at the top of the cliff to stop people falling over. And sinking lid policies are one of those things we focus on to try and do that. You've heard much about how community and sports groups rely on the community funding system for their very survival, and about how much benefit they believe, and I am sure do, deliver to the community of Wellington. We are not challenging that at all. We are asking you to think about, as has been so articulately put earlier, think about who loses the money, not just who benefits from it. We are asking you to put in place a policy that will mean those benefits do not come at the expense of poor, desperate, lonely and struggling families and individuals. Remember, for every gambler harmed, 6 are affected. The current format of pokie funding and community grants started in 1991, it was reformed in 2003, but there was community sport and there were community groups, and the All Blacks did win for a long time before that. The world will not end. Tobacco sponsorship proved this. We can transition out of this system of unfairness. Yes, we need a suite of interventions. I totally agree. Doesn't mean we don't do this particular one at this place because we can. Yes, we can protect people from themselves. That's why we require seatbelts. 50% of the machines are in the poorest areas, and they are designed to be addictive. Those gamblers are not giving to charity. They are chasing losses in the hope of a better life. And why are people making these choices? All of the choices that problem gamblers make are all the nasties, because that's all there is in their community. Fast food, bottle-os, cash converters, dairy selling sugar. Yes, all the bad stuff is there, and it is all the choice that they have. There is nothing else. They don't have a cafe and a cute little spot here in a boutique. It's all the nasties, all in one place, and people, it's all the choice they have. Of course they make those bad choices. You have heard the policy is not reducing harm. That's because the machines are staying where they should not. 10,000 are a drop in a bucket. We've got 14, nearly 15,000 machines out there, and they're all in the poorest communities. They're not coming down fast enough, and they're not coming down in the places where they are causing the most harm. You've heard that it's only a few people. That does not make it right or fair. That we benefit from another's suffering. Actually, the small number is the population of Hamilton around New Zealand, who are at the severe end of gambling harm, not the pathway down. We don't start life as a problem gambler, we get there. But then there is Section 314. So yes, a sinking lid with no venue relocations, and deal with the pokies and the TABs, because they are just as bad as anything in a pub. There is Section 314, and you can, as the legitimate community representatives of Wellington, petition the Minister of Internal Affairs, a new one, to ask the Minister to declare there will be no pokie machines in some areas. You could say to the Minister, we do not want pokie machines in Newtown. When the licences come up, we don't want to renew them, because the societies and trusts that run this system kneecap you. They inhibit, they limit, they restrict your democratic role to protect your community and enable the best for Wellington by the operation of the Gambling Commission and the failure of the regulator. I make no friends saying this, but it is the truth. Businesses, no matter how much they plead, they are not allowed to survive on pokie machines. They should be viable without them. If they need them to survive, they are not running a legal business. So we don't need to get caught up in that argument. It's all red herring. Online gambling and gaming. In COVID-19, the HPA, Health Promotion Agency, research people, yes, they went to online. They bought Lotto online because the supermarket was closed. Pokie gamblers did not flood to online. Pokie gambling is an addiction of a particular type. There is massive problem with money leaving New Zealand shores in online gambling. Absolutely there is. So is the TAB and their operation, how they promote primetime gambling on TV to children. Yes, there are massive problems out there, but it doesn't need to stop you doing one thing that you can, which is no venue, no relocations, sinking lids, petition the Department of Internal Affairs to get the machines out of the poor communities. We can transition to a safe place over time. We just need your commitment to exercise the authority you have to reduce the numbers in the poor areas. It's not an issue about who benefits from the money, it's an issue about who is losing it. So what we say is, please support the sinking lid policy and the no venue relocations, and then let's work together, as the speakers before have so well said, let's work together to find a way to go back to being a flourishing, thriving community and sports nation without relying on people losing nearly $1 billion a year into pokie machines. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Paula. We do have pātai from Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for bringing our attention to Section 314. I wasn't even aware that there was this power. Has it been exercised anywhere in New Zealand?
Nowhere, but I can tell you that at the hearing in Hastings coming up, that people there are going to ask the council there to exercise Section 314, because they feel hamstrung. in this regime. So it's growing. We're putting it out there that it is available. You have a new Minister of Department of Internal Affairs who I think has a different perspective. I think there's great potential with Section 314 to make sure the Act, Section 314 of the Gambling Act, to make sure that when you put in place your sinking-lid policy, you get the results that you want from it.
Cool. And my other question really was, I think you were alluding to, or you certainly mentioned us, we're democratically elected and we can sort of act in that way. And last time we had Pub Charity come along and try and I think really intimidate various councillors into not supporting it and basically saying that we were conflicted and it was quite an aggressive tactic and quite improper and inappropriate in my view. But anyway, that's two things about that really. The first one is that something you've seen at other councils? And the second one is, do you think there is any kind of redress, and I'll look into this a bit more, but any kind of redress or purpose to making a complaint about this in terms of stamping out that kind of behaviour and any kind of regulatory way that we can attempt to
I think
mitigate them or hold them to account?
Yes, well, I think two things. Let's ask Mr Chair to lay the same issue in front of every council where there are councillors with interest in pubs and clubs and sports groups who receive pokie funding. So that will be my reply to that. The response here I was quite surprised about, but it shows me that it's hurting. They know we're telling the truth and they know the system has to change.
Kia ora, Councillor Rush.
Thanks. Actually, I did ask our Democratic Services if I should participate as a member of a rugby club that does take money from the pokies. But to my question, you mentioned that prior to 1991 we all survived, and I do remember raising money as a younger man, and then the pub charity thing came in and we just had to go to a pub. Anyway, but there was quite a lot of sponsorship from some of the other nasties.
Yes, there were.
The Beats and Hedges put a huge amount of money into cricket, for example, and that money disappeared and has been made up. So I'm still wondering, what do we replace the funding with? Would you support ratepayers funding the difference between what's currently funded and what's left after the sinking lid takes effect?
Sure, I think that's a decision for council. I couldn't comment on that. What I can say, I'm a ratepayer here, but what I can say is that all of the money that we assume that all the money that gets paid out in grants is worthy. It's not. So by the time we're doing a deep analysis now on where the money is going, and not all of it, would you want to support that? Let people have a view on what they want to support. It's closed doors, given by trust, it's friend or favour. Get it, make it transparent. When you pare it right back and separate sport from community, the gap to fill does not look that large to me, and some of these things should be centrally government funded. If we want an air rescue service, fund it. You want an ambulance service? Fund it. That's a national benefit for a national good. It's a national need. When you take all of that stuff out, and the Auckland Rugby Union still gets $5 million a year, and it comes from Royal Oak Pokies. No, there is some, and Remuera can afford to fund their own rugby club. So there is, when you break it down and look at where the gap actually is, it'll be a lot smaller for Wellington to fill, and from commercial interest. And again, remember, displaced income. The money, that $40 million that's spent into pokie machines, will be spent elsewhere because NZIR said those gamblers spend every penny. It will be spent in Wellington on something else. So that means it's not a loss of revenue, it'll be displaced revenue. That does need more analysis, but it's a central government issue, that one, and we're putting it to the Minister of Internal Affairs and Health and every other minister we can find to say let's overhaul this broken system.
I have a patai about that, again, around the financial side, that we've heard a lot of organisations tell us of all the things they do for people living in poverty. But I know that obviously people who are gambling end up in the situation where they need support from many agencies because, of course, they can't do the basics and then end up with a lot of challenges as a result of that. Has there been any study done into know sort of the financial impact of that? Because we sort of get the sense that people can fix it, but we're actually creating a really big cost for our communities to cover. So it's sort of an inefficiency.
Yeah, well, particularly when you're talking about, even if you're talking about the 40%, you've still lost 60. You know, so if the 60 is spent in the community, then, now, look, not every gambler is an innocent person who will always do the right thing. There will be people who will spend money in ways that do not help their children. They always will be. But we've got a system that justifies it at the moment. So all we're saying is the displacement of income will be a benefit to Wellington, not a loss.
Kia ora, thank you so much, Paula. You're very clear there. Thank you for...
Thanks so much. Kia ora.
All right, now, councillors, what we need to do is to go into public excluded for the next couple of submissions. So I'm going to move this motion. I'm just wondering if I can have a seconder for this. Oh my goodness, there's like so much energy. Councillor Rush, I think you can do that. You got your hand up pretty high. Right, so then we need to, I'm imagining there's no debate on that and we can go and vote. And Vicky is staying in here with us.
That's a yes from me.
Oh, yes from Jenny. And that means Jenny needs to stay online, but we're going to not be streaming anything now. Oh, Deputy Mayor Free. Deputy Mayor Free. Oh, she's left the room, so she can't vote. Oh, okay, so Councillor Calvert didn't vote because she's not here. We might need to take that again.
Can you do it again?
Doesn't matter, we know. Is she here?
Yeah, okay, let's do it again. Can you do it again?
Okay, we're going to vote again.
Naughty councillor.
Naughty Councillor Sparrow. At least he's very honest. So Councillor Condi was a yes. Someone can...
Yes again.
Kia ora. Deputy Mayor Free, can you please press a button about going into public excluded? Thank you. So then we just need to make sure that we're not streaming. So that is carried. Can you let me know when we're clear?